Okay folks, we're back working on the 2007 E90 328xi. This vehicle is now my, it's been transferred, inter-family transfer I guess you would say, from my youngest son to my oldest son. And this video is going kind of out of order. I should say projects are going out of order. I've got a vehicle on the lift. That project's underway. I've got 2 lawn tractor projects. Got some stuff to finish up on others, and now we have a problem with the 2007 in that the right rear shock is completely blown. When I say that, this shock it's got 56,000 miles on it. I replaced these in May of 2014, and we just not long after we got the vehicle. At that time, I installed Sachs, S-A-C-H-S. That's the OEM supplier for BMW. I replaced the 2 rear shocks with Sachs components. I should have changed these sooner. I should have gotten these out of here already, but the one on the right, it's effectively doing nothing. And if you see something like this, it means that the shock mount is broken. You can see I can just move it with my hand freely. The shock mount itself is failed, and the shock needs to be replaced. So thank God for FCP Euro. We have a pile of parts here in the box, and I've gone with Bilsteins this time instead of the Sachs or the OEM replacement from BMW. Just a slight upgrade. Should be the same dampening force, firmness, etc. And I got all new shock mounts, all new bottom and top, everything. So that should be really good. And I'll get into this momentarily and pause the video and show what we're doing. So just had to make a little bit of a adjustment in schedules and things. Normally I would put the vehicle on the lift, but as I said, I've got other things going on. So back in a moment. Okay folks, I've got the top of the strut mount removed, and that is a 16mm nut. The piston itself is 8mm, so 8mm to hold the piston in place, and then a 16mm to back out the nut. So let's walk over here and look at the shock from below. You can see the shock is just spewing. So made a nice gurgling sound and everything as I was releasing it. Now the hole is still nice and clean, nothing damaged there on the chassis, but the point of failure was this right here. So, and this is common, this is not unique. This happens on these. I don't know why they don't treat these in some way, paint them or coat them, prevent them from rusting, but nevertheless, the shock needs to be replaced. And as I said earlier, I should have already changed this. The front struts on this vehicle they've been done actually twice during its ownership period, but within the last 2 years I did the front struts, and for some reason I neglected to do the rear. So this should have been changed sooner. You know, here we are, we're doing it now. Now let's have a look at the mount on the bottom. I've got there's 2 E12 Torx. They come in from the bottom and they hold that mount in place. So all new hardware. I've got all new things to put in here, and we'll get those on momentarily, and I'll take an interval and show what's going on. Okay folks, the new shock is installed. I had great difficulty removing the old one. I'll talk about that momentarily. Let's take a look at the new shock mount. New shock mount nuts, the shock itself, and up top, let's look at the top mount. So all new hardware, all new everything. And I'll get into what occurred with the old one momentarily. Okay folks, let's take a look at the evidence. Nothing real exciting here, but just a moment to show what I had to do to get the shock out of the lower mount. Now keep in mind, you cannot remove the lower mount with the shock still in place. As you can see, serious corrosion here. The bolt eventually, the nut rather, is stripped out. It just would not come off, and it's you know, it's nasty looking. So anyway, I had to actually use a Dremel tool and cut the bottom of the shock so that I could get this part up and out, and then work on getting the mount out of the bottom. Now the mount is in this, and the car is no longer here, unfortunately. My son needed to use it, but the lower mount has a clip of sorts built into the wishbone, and that clip is, well, how would I say it, non-negotiable, or it doesn't move. It's yeah, it's a bit of a pain. You have to work the old mount out and the new mount in, and it's just a really tight space, and it fights you a little bit, or it will fight you. Here are the parts and pieces from the top again, and this is where the failure occurred, aside from the fact that there is hydraulic fluid everywhere from the shock. Now, I'll actually turn the shock upside down and drain it, and then take this to metal recycling instead of throwing it in the garbage. And thank goodness for my Dremel tool of nearly 30 years, or I think it is 30 years old. Nevertheless, it came in very handy and got me through this. We'll install the next, or the other shock, probably tomorrow, and we'll get this wrapped up. The vehicle has returned. We are into the following day, and it is time to complete the rear shock replacement, focusing this time on the driver's side. I'm hoping for a better experience. Worst case, I will have to cut the lower stem off of the driver's side shock as I did on the passenger side, but we'll see what happens. Again, this vehicle is, well, it's currently at 150,000 miles, and the shocks have 56,000 miles on them. They were installed in May of 2014, so they should have lasted a little longer, but ideally I should have replaced them sooner. The front struts were done a couple years ago, so we'll move on, and I'll try to stop and show a couple of key things here on this driver's side as I'm doing this. Once again, I am doing this operation on the floor. The lift is occupied with yet another project, so let's take a quick look. I have removed the top and bottom mounting bolts for the driver's side rear shock, and let's take a look at the top first. So this is not completely broken down, and it's not in a failed state, although it is heavily worn. So let me see if I can, with one hand, compress this. There we go. So that's well, it's still working, still pretty firm, but that's what you're going to do. And then, since I already have the bottom bolt removed, I can just pull this out of the mount. But before I do that, let's take a look at that nut. Now, this is so much better than what occurred on the passenger side. The nut itself is, it's rusty, but it's in one piece. It didn't strip out. There's a lot of torque on that, and of course a lot of corrosion on the stem as well. So that all worked out, and that is, let's see if I can do this on camera. That's up in this hole. So not the most handy of places to reach. You can't get anything else. Well, you can get a socket on it, you can't get a wrench on it, and you can't cut it off. Hence the reason when I cut the one off the passenger side yesterday, I cut the stem right there at the bottom of the shock housing. So that's the best I could do. But let's get this shock out of the mount, and then I'll take a momentary pause here, and we'll come back. Good thing I paused the video, because removing the shock from the lower mount, that wasn't going to happen with just one hand. It required a couple of minutes of twisting and fighting, and basically this lower stem was fused to the mount itself. So lots of corrosion and dirt and so on. But what's amazing about this side is, the shock is still functional. It hasn't failed. And check this out. It's not rusted. It's not ripped apart like the center of the passenger side was. So it's quite remarkable, the difference side to side, but nevertheless, we'll go ahead and get this other one installed. But before we do that, we have to get the old mount out of the lower suspension assembly there. I don't know if they consider this a wishbone or carrier, but whatever they call it, it's you can see this clip right here. I call it a clip. It's not really a clip. It's just a metal bracket, and it is, you have to work the old out and the new in and kind of wiggle and press and stuff like that. So 2 E15 bolts, which are from the bottom, and we'll come back in just a moment. The lower shock mount is now loosened. Let's take a look. You can see it's seen better days, but what you want to do is you want to position it under that metal, like I refer to it as a clip, but it's just a bracket. Get it under there and then raise it up from the back. Again, this is metal encased rubber, so there is some room to work there, and you can just pry this out. Now, the new one, this is from ZF Lemferger. It's an OEM part, and it's uniform front to rear, left to right, and again, metal encased rubber. So it goes in the same way, same orientation. So you slip it in from in this angle, like towards the hub, and then you pop it into place. So we'll get this one in and carry on. Okay, the new lower mount is in place, looking good. Notice that the E15 bolts that come in from the bottom, they're not fully tightened or torqued yet. I'll explain in just a second. Now, I have the shock assembly here, and again, this is actually a set from FCP Euro, and I've gone different directions before where I've purchased each individual part, all the things that you see here, including the shock itself, and they even include the lower mounting nut. Now that's humorous to me because so many times I've purchased shocks and struts and all kinds of suspension equipment, and they'll leave out fasteners like that, but in this case it's included, so that's a nice touch. But this is this is the kit that you get for Bilstein. You can get the same exact kit for or if you want to opt to use the Sachs brand OEM parts, but I wanted to go with Bilstein this time around. So when you sit this in place, and I don't know, now I'm not going to be able to do this on camera unfortunately, but the whole point in trying to show this is, and I have to compress this, and it's nearly impossible to do with one hand and have the camera in the other hand. So the point I wanted to make is you leave those lower shock mount bolts loose because you have to actually torque the or I should say force the shock to go up into the upper mount, and so that is to say that it's always under stress, or it's always under pressure from the lower mount. So just be aware of that. You slip this in, it's going to be sticking straight up and down. It's not going to match up with the upper mount hole there in the chassis, so you're going to have to deal with this, and it just takes a little bit of, you've got to compress the shock, lean it in, press it in, and then release it, and it will pop up into that into the mounting hole. So that's it. Unfortunately, I can't do this on camera, but I will come back. Okay, the shock is now in the lower mount. So again, what you have to do is you have to compress this, which I'm not going to be able to do with one hand, and then you lean it in, and it's good to have those lower bolts loose because then there's not so much pressure. But again, these are always mounted and they're always under stress with that lower mount, and that's the point I was trying to make. Here it is on the bottom, so you can see there's plenty of movement there. It's not going to fight me, and then I'll come back afterwards, tighten the bolts, and we're all good. Okay folks, everything is now nice and tight, the lower bolts on the shock mount, and you can see how the shock is now. Well, it's in place, but if you look down below, you can see the rubber is kind of stressed to one side and pulled to one side in the mount itself, and that's the way it goes. So those bolts are in, the lower shock bolt is in as well, and we'll go up top. We're back up top. All that remains is the top mounting bolt, which in this case is it's a 3-fur here. We've got the 16mm locking nut, integrated large washer, and then this foam pad on the bottom. This is super sturdy, by the way. Even the older ones that came out, they feel as strong as the one that's going in. So let's do this real quick. It goes like this, and then the stem, or should I say the piston of the shock, that is an 8mm, and then again the bolt is 16, or the nut is 16mm. So you just need something to hold that in place, and you should be good to go. So I'll go off camera, get this wrapped up. Closing thoughts on the rear shock replacement. If the lift were available, I would have used impact wrenches to remove many of the bolts, nuts and bolts, the fasteners, but I would have done so cautiously. Most likely I would have used hand tools to get them started and just spun them out from there, because the things are so rusted and corroded many times that you just create more problems for yourself. So that's my only really thought there. But next up is idler pulley, tensioner pulley on this. It's starting to make a little noise, and we'll get on with it.